If you're a fan of old books like me, you're probably familiar with the Penguin classics. But today, I want to talk about a different classic, The Penguin. For the last 8 weeks, I've been watching The Penguin every Sunday night on HBO. And last night was the finale. As I watched, I couldn't help but think about Shakespeare and the ways in which the Penguin reminds me so much of an iconic Shakespeare villain. I'm talking about Iago, the villain of Othello. He is perhaps one of Shakespeare's greatest characters ever, and arguably his best villain, period. And what I love about Iago is that despite his blatant evilness, you still respect and admire the way in which he goes about manipulating the situation. I want to be very clear, both as I'm talking about Iago and as I'm talking about Oz in The Penguin. Every praise that I have should be underscored by the fact that both of these men are deeply, deeply bad people. I want to be very clear in my disgust for the behaviors that they exhibit, the mentalities that they embody, and the pride that they have for their actions. But even in saying that, right, like I hope that you can already see the parallels. Both of these men are shameless in what they do, and not only shameless, but proud, right? Like they build their identities up in the way that they are able to manipulate others to get what they want. They are selfish to their core, and in so doing, they are able to work their way up in society, right? Like Iago is from a more lower class family, as is Oz, and they rise through the ranks, Iago through the ranks of the military and Oswald through the ranks of the local gangs in Gotham. And they are faced sort of at the crux of their stories, right, in The Penguin and in Othello, with sort of one last hurdle to climb, to sort of get to the very top of their game. The ways in which both the creators of The Penguin and Shakespeare implement dramatic irony to sort of show us, the audience, their thought process, so that when we watch them interact with other people, we really feel a sense of corrupt and strange and reluctant awe and admiration for what they're doing. Iago is in many ways a far more interesting character than Othello. Othello is tragic, Othello is sad, but he is very predictable in a way. He is the victim of Iago's manipulations. And so many students, when I've read Othello, which I just finished a couple weeks ago with my sophomores, many students like Iago's character more than they like Othello. Again, not in terms of like, this is a good person, but in terms of like, this is a well-written, well-crafted character who I'm excited to see what they're gonna do next. And I feel like that's the core of what we're seeing in modern media, all of these sort of villain origin stories, the Joker being one of them, but there are plenty of other examples. And I think The Penguin falls into this newfound category of telling the story of how a classic villain from another series came to be the way they are, right? We all know the Penguin from Batman, but this centers him as the main character, the main focus. And in that kind of story, right, he's an anti-hero. He is meant to be seen as the main character, but not somebody that is purely heroic. Iago works in a similar way. I think what kept drawing me back to watching The Penguin was, again, thinking about this kind of storytelling, right, where the creators of a show are able to make an audience invested in the actions of someone who is so obviously corrupt and so obviously not a moral, upstanding person. I sometimes feel bad for being so engaged in these stories, but that's kind of the point, right? I think these stories, when they're working, are meant as mirrors for ourselves, right? To recognize traits in others that we want to avoid in ourselves. Iago is in many ways more jealous than Othello, right? Othello is the kind of archetypical jealous lover, but Iago's motivations throughout this book are purely jealousy, right? In Iago's very first soliloquy at the end of Act 1, he says, "I hate the more, and it is thought abroad that twixt my sheets has done my office. I know not if it be true, but I, for mere suspicion in that kind, will do as if for surety." What he's saying is there's this rumor going around that Othello has slept with Iago's wife, Emilia. And he says, I do not know if it is true, but I will act as if for surety, right? He's just gonna go for the rest of the play pretending that it is true that Othello has slept with Emilia. So for all the criticism that I think we rightly pile on Othello for doubting the fidelity of his own wife, for not talking to Desdemona about what's going on, for jumping to conclusions, Iago jumps to conclusions even more than Othello does, right? It is Iago's jealousy of even the potential, the rumor that his wife has slept with Othello, that drives him to all of this revenge. And so I think in many ways, it becomes very clear early on that despite the tragicness of Othello's arc, and despite the fact that by the end of the play we are meant to despise Othello, we are meant to despise Iago even worse from the very beginning. And I think in many ways that is the same arc that we see in The Penguin, right? There's a way in which Victor, the sort of sidekick character, is meant to be a stand-in for us as the audience. I think oftentimes these kinds of shows have a sort of straight man, sort of like younger person who's caught up in the whirlwind of this sort of crime. I think Jesse Pinkman serves a similar role in Breaking Bad, where we as the audience are meant to sort of relate more clearly with this younger person, and to feel sympathy for how they are sort of caught up in the machinations and the sort of corruption of their sort of older mentor character. Through Victor's eyes, I think we are able to see Oz's, I think, just sheer manipulation, right? Like there's no other way around it except to say that he is a master at turning people against one another. In the finale, I'm not going to spoil too much, but the moment that really solidified in my head that like, yes, this is exactly like Iago, was the scene partway through where Oz, having just been stabbed in the stomach and bandaged himself in the hospital, puts on a nice suit and goes to city council and spins a story to this councilman about how the disaster that had just happened was actually not his fault at all, but he was able to pit two other people against each other in a really clever and a really genius way. Like I was watching it and I couldn't help but be impressed with the logic of his argument to this councilman and the way in which he was able to look at what that councilman needed, the story that he wanted to be able to tell, to give him that story in a way that kept his own name clear and put all of the dirt on other people's hands. That's exactly what Iago does, right? Iago, we see Iago as the audience through his soliloquies, but every time Iago is with another character, he's putting on a different mask. I actually really like, with my students, not talking about Iago as two-faced, because he has way more than two faces. Iago is a different person when he's with Othello, as when he's with Cassio, as when he's with Rodrigo, as when he's with his wife, and he's so skilled at playing all of these different roles to give people exactly what they want. And I think that that's what makes him so compelling, because you can't help but be impressed by the way that he is able to read people so precisely and to see exactly what they want to hear and to feed them the exact lies that they want to know, that he knows that they will believe. And it's awful, right? Like it's, as an audience member, like you feel so bad for the people being lied to, because when you put yourself in their shoes, it makes total sense, right? Like there is no reason for them to doubt. And I think that that's what gives me, again, so much compassion and I think sympathy for Othello, is that all along the way, it's really hard to pinpoint a moment, especially through the first half of the play, where Othello makes the wrong decision, because Iago is so good at giving him all of the things that he needs in order to feel justified. And again, none of this is to excuse what Othello does. None of this in The Penguin excuses what Victor does in Oz's Name or any of these other characters, right? Like these are all stories of deep evil and deep corruption. But the way in which we see those characters working through other people is masterfully crafted. And so I think that in that way, The Penguin operates with the same mentality as Iago does, as the character who is purely self-interested and is so skilled at pitting people against each other and feeding people the exact stories that they want in order to feel better about themselves and turn their eyes on each other rather than on him. I realize now this is my second video in a row comparing a comic book character on film to a Shakespeare character. If you like this kind of thing, I'm happy to do more. I really enjoy thinking about the ways that modern characters in film and television relate to sort of older archetypal characters in literature. And so if you want to hear more about excellent villains, go to the bottom of this video and click like and subscribe.